so much of our life right now is passive consumption. We're just like the dude on Wall-E who's just like watching the screen and going for a ride and I guess kind of living, but not really. And I get it. Like we're all consumers of this stuff. We can't escape it. Step one is realizing, how are you using these things? How are you using social media? Are you using it towards an active thing, or are you just passively consuming it?
All right. Welcome back to the show, Steve. Great to have you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys.
As we jump in, I'd love to hear what was the impetus for this latest book, your newest project?
I think we write the books that we need. And this go round, as I kind of transitioned in work to focus more on writing and less in the running coaching space, as I, became a father myself and now have two, you start going through like, okay, what game am I playing here? And how does this affect things? And I think as I also entered a little bit older of age, you realize that like a lot of what I was doing or thinking when I was younger, chasing the accolades, chasing the status, chasing the external achievements, well, that might get you going. It's not sustainable on the long haul and often is the thing that gets in the way. So both with myself and then the high performers that I was working with, I really kind of noticed that often the things that made them pretty good were the things that were preventing them from becoming great. And I wanted to explore, how we can help people fulfill their potential.
Well, there's so much to unpack there, but I want to first point out the gamesmanship. So, when we think about our youth, whether you're in sports or not, we're all focused on winning that external game that we feel everyone is playing. And then as you get older in your career, starting a family, you start to recognize that the inner game, what's going on inside, matters so much more. And a lot of times because of success in the outer game, you haven't really wrestled with any of that inner game turmoil that's going on.
We can almost fake our way through it because like we get a little achievements, we feel good about ourselves, we say, hey, this is the path we're going on. And this is often what you see with whether you're talking about high level athletes or even entrepreneurs. There was a wonderful study on this with Olympic swimmers where it essentially showed that early in their career, they had what they call the performance or achievement mindset, meaning I got to win the race. I got to get the medal. I got to swim faster than I ever have. But inevitably, at some point in their career, often as they were making that transition to maybe Olympic level, that mindset started getting in the way because they started feeling more pressure. Those wins became harder and harder. The new personal best became fewer and fewer because you're playing in the minutia, right? You're at the edge of your potential. And what researchers found is that those who had like a mindset shift, who started seeing it as like a quest mindset, they said, or a journey, which is, I still care about the wins. I still want to win that Olympic medal. But as I see it, it's more about kind of who I become and how I'm navigating all of the adversity that I find myself through. It's more of that journey than it is achieving the thing. If you switch that mindset, they found swimmers had a better, mental health around things, but they still performed at a high level. And I think in many ways, that's the journey we all kind of go through, where we realize at some point is like, yeah, all this external stuff, I get it. World's telling us to focus on this, but if I don't do the inner work, I'm gonna be in a bad spot.
Well, one thing to go along with that is, and I think that story with the Olympic athletes represents it pretty well, is as you continue to climb, but even just as you grow up, the more information you take in, the more your beliefs and ideas about the world shape. I know that I don't see the world in any shape or form when I came into this 20 years ago. And AJ and yourself just had a child. And that's AJ's first one. And I don't have a child, but I certainly know that that changes your perspective on the world immediately.
It absolutely does. And what you're getting here is actually what a long history of psychological research on identity development tells us, is that we need things that broaden and shape our perspective. And that could be having a child, which is the ultimate, perspective thing. But it's also doing real things in the real world, right? It's going down rabbit holes of pursuing things, of searching for mastery, of seeing, hey, I want to try this thing out and see if I'm good at it. It's even in our dating world. If you look at the research, it shows that one of the reasons we figure out eventually who we're a pretty good fit with is what? Exploration, right? We broaden our perspective because we realize, the mythos or dreams of our childhood on what was good is not actually what fits us in the real world. So I think you're spot on, is like we need things to broaden our perspective, which helps us, see, I think kind of who we are and where our beliefs and values lie.
That becomes an issue, which is, what are the guidance systems to make sure that your perspectives stay in an area where you can continue to improve rather than continue to degenerate?
Yeah.
And that's DNA. That's in your how you were in your family, in your kin. There's many components to that, but having that guidance system is incredibly important. It keeps you on track in all of these quests.
A central part of this book is like figuring out that guidance system to a degree. It's like how you show up at work, how you show up in your pursuits, how you show up in your family life, and more so how you show up when, the rubber meets the road and your guidance system is put to the test. I think that's where we really see things. And I think if you look at the research, I think people underestimate how easy it is to go off track, especially nowadays, meaning you get pulled in one of many directions. The old adage that our moms all told us, which is like, if Johnny jumps off a bridge, are you going to do it too? There's some truth in that.
Of course.
Where if we surround ourselves, poorly, like we're gonna ditch our values to the side and just go along with it.
Well, that's what I think is so interesting about the different parts of the book and how it's laid out. And I'm curious around the order, because I feel like in my youth, I was doing them in the opposite order. I put all of my focus on belong. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be part of the in crowd. I wanted people to celebrate me for belonging. And then I would do things based on where I belonged. And then I never really grappled with the be, who am I? Because I was so busy with just doing to stay belonging in groups that I thought at that point were really valuable for me. Then after college and going on my own exploration, I realized like, wow, a lot of those groups and things that I cared so much about don't matter at all. But I'm now struggling with who am I and starting that journey all over again. So in the three parts of the book, there is the order in a specific way to wrestle with these, or is it work on any three in any order? How do you view it?
I had the same experience. And again, I think if you look at the psychological research, it bears this out, because when you're young, what do? We just want to fit in, right? We're middle school or high school or whatever. And you're just like, okay, find me a freaking table at lunch to sit in and a group of friends that I can hang out with. And what happens is we start shaping ourselves around whatever that group is. But often what happens is people, reflect and they're like, this isn't the path. I got my career started coaching college athletes. And I did that for a number of years. And it was inevitably, I'd have a kid in my office who, their sophomore or junior year would sit down and be like, I'm in this major because My parents wanted me to be in it. My friends said, hey, this is what you should do. And they're like, I hate this. I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And they felt, it's like, I just felt like I was listening to everyone else. And that experience is often that turning point where you start to realize, like, okay, who am I? And that's why I frame the book, where I think we've got to start from a point, whether we're looking at our athletic pursuits, our intellectual pursuits, our jobs, our workplaces, our relationships. We've got to start with the point where it's like, I need to figure out who I am, what matters, and like have security in. And if I do, that allows me to pursue the pursuits in a way that, resonates with that, and also, chase success in a way that I feel comfortable defining that, which is inevitably going to allow me to find people who I can really bring myself to and belong, instead of trying to fit in with that group and changing myself just to like fit in.
So many of us right now, with concerns of recession and AI and what's happening in our career and things just feeling harder and more expensive than ever, might not even realize that we're just stuck in this survival mode, and then all of the downstream impacts that survival has on our ability to figure out who we are, what we should be doing, and where we belong, because we've dysregulated ourselves just in this survival mode. So let's unpack that first. So for those in our audience who might not even realize that they're in survival mode, can recognize, okay, I got to make these changes before I can even start the quest of B.
Survival mode is the best way to think of it is when you're walking around with like a low level anxiety, you almost start to see threats everywhere. It's like your threat alarm is tuned to 11. And what happens is we get in these states where we start avoiding the thing that we need to do or actually want to do. We start self-protecting, meaning if we lose a race or we don't get that job, we start rationalizing and justifying ourselves instead of like exploring. And it's essentially the opposite of being in the kind of like mindset where you're seeking out growth, you're seeking out challenges. It's all avoidance and protection. Part of the reason we're all in that spot is for the reasons that you just elucidated there, is that we live in a world where it's no longer local, it's global. Meaning it feels like we can never measure up because the comparison point is so freaking high. Okay. It feels like we're insignificant because, again, we can't measure up. We can't do anything. We feel discombobulated because there's social media pulling us to act in this way and then real life pulling us to act in another way. So we lack this kind of coherence. And whenever your brain kind of gets in a state where it's just kind of chaotic, it just defaults towards, okay, how do I survive this moment? Just get me through the next moment. Self-protect. And we stop thinking about, long-term growth, long-term planning.
With every piece of new technology, that opens our worlds up even farther. So more people to compete with, more ideas to go through, starting with, we began writing to the printing press, to radio, to television, and now the internet, which, you can look at the internet and I guess it was with the introduction of smartphones to where everyone now was on a global stage and competing, which that's a new experiment. At least in the TV generation, well, you could rationalize it away as that's just the show. That's just on television.
Outside of the competing, I think the other piece to the puzzle that often isn't talked about is the certainty that is illusory. So being online, seeing these things from other people, even if you don't see yourself as competing with them, there's a degree of certainty that you ascribe to others. And then when you're feeling that uncertainty yourself, and it's not celebrated in self-help books, it's not talked about regularly, everyone else seems so sure of themselves because of the picture that's being painted in this global comparison game. That lack of certainty and your inability to deal with the uncertainty heightens the anxiety even more and turns that survival mechanism into overdrive.
The latest theory on how our brain works is it is essentially a uncertainty reducing machine, meaning it hates uncertainty and it says, how can I like decrease this and make me feel certain as quick as possible? And anxiety is a result of like going through that mechanism and being like, holy crap, I've got to grasp onto something to, make me feel a little bit certain. And the false degree or false sense of comparison of looking around and seeing everyone's essential, final products and comparing it to our rough drafts just puts that brain into overdrive on that uncertainty, stress, threat, survival spot. And it really is. I loved what you said there, John, is we're running an experiment. Because if you look at it, the human brain was meant for like local tribal competition, local tribal relationships. And in fact, there's this wonderful study that looked at how tribes grew. And what they found is that way back in the day, hunter-gatherers, they could only grow to a spot large enough where where you still felt like you knew everyone. So it was about 150 people.
Oh, yeah.
Once you got beyond that, like the tribe split apart in chaos because they couldn't handle it. It wasn't until they started started having like writing where we could go beyond that, because you started to understand, okay, we can have, they called them an anonymous society, which means there are people you don't know because we have some sort of construction here, writing in this case, and other things that came about, religion, et cetera, that allows us to give some structure. I think what we're going through right now is an anonymous society on steroids, where we haven't kind of figured out, okay, what are the things and mechanisms that we need to put in place during this experiment that allow people to not feel this like constant comparison, anxiety driven survival all the freaking time.
Something else you mentioned there that is very important as well, and you probably have noticed this in your coaching, which is once those tribes split up, if they don't have a common goal that they are collaborating and working on, they're going to war between themselves.
Again, if you look at some of the history and anthropology behind it, it's the classic thing of like, you need societies and cultures that have essentially, they call them master narratives, which are like something to tie them together, to make sense of the past, the present, and where we're going in the future. You have to have those to essentially create that cohesion. And I think, again, what you're seeing in our modern culture, whether you call it survival mode or something else, is we're losing some of our kind of master narratives or master stories. And we're entering a kind of experimental zone, especially with AI and other things coming, where it's like, okay, where's the cohesive thing that allows us to realize that the world isn't us versus them, but like we're in the same arena, on the same team. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
Well, one of those narratives is the American dream, and laced in the American dream is achievement and validation tied to that achievement. That you do certain things, and if you do those certain things, you check those certain boxes, then you are entitled to that next thing. And that was a master narrative that tied us all together for so long, and that fraying now of that narrative is leading to the tribalism, the discomfort, the uncertainty, and the anxiety that we're all feeling, and then heightened even more with the comparison of those around us who feel like they are achieving it in the face of us not achieving it. So it being rubbed in your face when your neighbor is achieving the American dream, or that person on social media is achieving it with what looks like less effort, less ability, less aptitude than you.
The American dream was about the hope or the opportunity, right? When our founders wrote the pursuit of happiness, what they were talking about was the opportunity to increase your lot in life through hard work, dedication, et cetera. And what we've increasingly turned that American dream into is like the external validation of, the fancy car, the whatever status symbols we have. And I think what we've seen there, and I think also what some of the research bears out here, is that when we've shifted that American dream towards like growth and development of individuals in our society, when we shifted that, what happens is we've now created one that is like impossible to live up to for many people. And those comparisons hit us smack in the face. And I think the other part of it is like we've pursued the external without understanding that the American dream also meant like the internal. So for instance, in the book, I talk about the founder of capitalism, Adam Smith. And when we think of capitalism, most Americans think like, oh, greed is good. Go after whatever you can, like make as much money as you want. But Smith warned us in his writings. He said, yeah, all that is good. We need to build things and sell things and do great things in that regard. But if you don't couple them with what he called tranquility and contentment, we're going to be essentially miserable. And I think that's the message that was lost, both from Smith and capitalism and our founders in coining kind of the pursuit of happiness, is that we need, the pursuit of greatness, of achievement, but we've got to couple that with enough like internal resolve and inner strength that like we don't drive ourselves insane, always chasing and never being somewhat satisfied with what we have.
Well, that first step of B and understanding with clarity who you are creates the guardrail around what you define happiness as. So instead of focusing on what everyone else says is happiness, or the marketing or the capitalism says is happiness, when you ground yourself in who you are and what truly makes you happy, that's a much better starting point for that pursuit of happiness in the American dream. And what's so interesting, so many of these themes throughout the book, is this duality that's presented. And when we don't take the internal into account, we just focus on the external, we struggle. When we only focus on exploration, but we lack commitment, we struggle. But so many stories around success don't wrestle with these dualities. They make it more prescriptive. Like it's just this one force. You follow this one thing, you check this one box, you get there. So how should we be viewing success in the face of these dualities that are just part of human nature?
It's messy and complicated. And that's the story that doesn't get told. But if you work with elite performers and watch them, the secret is in the messy middle. Meaning, it's how do I care a lot about the pursuit, but realize that if I only care about the wins or losses, that's going to make me perform worse. I think it was the NFL quarterback, and I'm going to butcher the quote, I'll paraphrase it. But recently at a press conference, Jaden Daniels said essentially, like, I need to hold two things at once. I need to hold that, like, it matters that we win, and I need to do everything that we win to help us win. But I also need to forget about winning. Because if you focus too much on it, what happens is you're going to drive yourself nuts. You're going to put more pressure on yourself. You're going to start doing things that may help in the short term, but not help you over the long term. And I think that's what this duality of whether talking about performance or living well is, we're able to do that. And in the book, I talk about at some point, the one of my favorite runners, Sarah Hall, who's one of the best marathoners in the world. But she would always tell me, I got to work with her for several years. She would always tell me, like, she would set big goals, but then at some point that chasing that big goal would get in the way, and she'd realize she called it throw the watch away, meaning looking at the watch and seeing, am I on pace to run this goal is driving me nuts. I need to just focus on the inner feeling and let go. Now, the key here is the duality. She didn't say, oh, forget it, I'm not trying to run fast. She said, yes, this matters, but it can also get in the way, and I need to let go and trust myself. And I think that messy middle is where it's at, whether we're talking about performance, whether we're talking about living well. We've got to deal with it instead of coming up with cheap slogans.
Well, you brought up a great point. You cannot serve two masters. So is it winning, or is it the pursuit? Is it your time, or is it, enjoying the process? Because I think that's where a lot of that, the anxiety and unhappy feelings come from, is trying to serve multiple masters.
I remember talking to world-class baseball coach Tom House, who coached beyond baseball. He's basically the guy you go to for any throwing problem. Like he coached Nolan Ryan and Randy Johnson and Drew Brees and Tom Brady. So anybody who throws anything, Tom has worked with. And I asked him, I said, what's the deal with all these greats? You've worked with the goats of all sports. And he said, pretty simple. He said, quickly they realize that the key is like understanding to focus on the process and falling in love with the process. And if you're trying to serve both masters of like, I'm going to go win and I'm going to go like focus on the process, what's going to happen is like, you're going to drive yourself nuts. So, and I remember him saying this line, he said, winning a game or even winning a championship takes the greats out of that process mode for such a minute time period. Other people, it takes them out for weeks and months and they, get distracted by chasing this thing. For the greats, it's like, okay, I won, great. Like, what are the things that I need to do? What does my day to day look like? What are the next steps in this journey? And I think that, again, it sounds trite. It sounds like, okay, does that really work? But it's literally what the best of the best are doing.
And with that, they also recognize, and we forget in watching the greats, their defeats too. All of those moments of choking, all of those moments of missing, all of those moments of failing, of losing in the NFC Championship game, of losing in the regular season and not making the playoffs, lights the fire under their belly for the next season and then getting back to that glory. But we remember them as greats for those victories, for those moments of glory. And then we ascribe, looking back in the past, oh, they never missed. They always won. They always had the process dialed in. And that's just not the case. I mean, you look at the greats, they're changing coaches. They're bringing in new people. They're working on their mechanics. Every single one of them over the longevity of their career are looking for the edge through the process, not through the outcome. So how can we bring that to us who aren't athletes, who are just mere mortals, who aren't training for the Olympics or aren't training for the Super Bowl, but want to live a great, fulfilling life?
The first step to navigating that is to not see it as like this be all end all thing where you take it personally and say, I got let go of the job, therefore I am a failure. What happens is we internalize it often. We see it as a personal character trait instead of, I think the thing to learn from many of these greats is they don't see it as a character trait. They see it as something that occurred that now they can learn from and like improve upon and figure out. In fact, this past weekend, I was sitting at a conference on a panel with some of the, a couple of the best athletes on the planet. And one of them put it to me like this, former WNBA star who now is in the executive for the Boston Celtics. She said essentially that it's the story we tell ourselves in our head. That's the most important story or narrative we could have, but so few of us tend to think about it. And her point was this, is that for her and so many of the athletes she's worked with is that when failure hits, the story isn't, I suck. The story is, okay, this occurred. Where do I go now? How do I navigate this? How do I learn from it and grow from it? How do I fix this? And I think if you're sitting at home, I think changing that story in your head of how you handle setbacks and failure is step one to, allowing you to live a better and more successful life.
With our clients, we focus on this concept of self-authoring and how important it is to take the pen and write the story versus let other people write the story for you. And sometimes it's our family writing the story. Sometimes it's our coworkers and their feedback. It's an ex-partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever that's written that part of the story. And we've held on to that narrative. But we all have the power to grab the pen and write our own story. And once you recognize that, it unlocks so many of these other things that lower the uncertainty, that find the core values, that allow you to find the greater than you mission that's so important to that B. But for those of us who haven't really wrestled with what our story is, or even recognize that we can control or write the story, what is that advice to take the first step to really wrestle with the B part of you, the clarity around who you are?
Yeah, I mean, I think step one is setting yourself apart some time to do just that. Think about who you are, and not just think about it, but like look at exploring interesting things in your life that make you feel, alive or connected to, your innermost being, essentially. Sounds kind of meta, but what you're trying to do is use doing things to understand, okay, this is what I care about. This makes me feel alive. This makes me feel energized. And what you're trying to do there is, again, get at the core of like what's important. And then I think from the story side is you've got to be able to zoom out and create some perspective so that you can see the different stories that you can tell about yourself. So one of the exercises I like to have clients or people do is ask them, hey, here's this thing that happened to you. How would your mom tell this story about you? How would your friend tell this story about you? How would a stranger who just saw this tell this story? And the idea is probably what happens is they start to see different perspectives. And you start to see like, hey, these facts happened, but how I piece them together is up to a degree, my own interpretation. And then I also love to bring research into this where it shows that I think it's Dan McAdams who done a lot of research on this that shows that basically we can tell our story in a number of different ways. But the key constructs are this. Does our story have agency? Meaning you feel like you have control. You're not feeling like, oh, this is just happening to me and I'm along for the ride. No, you have input. Okay, so agency. Is there some sort of companionship? Meaning there's other people in your life who you're bringing along on these journeys with. And then C is, does it have growth themes? Which basically means this. Is there some sort of lesson or thing that you carry forward on going through either their successes or failures? And what research tells us, if we have those three things, we tend to have a higher level of well-being, even if like some bad stuff happens to us.
When you're writing this out, when you're choosing the words that you are going to use to describe your experiences and your story, then you're discounting other things. And for a lot of folks, and we see this all the time because I'll ask them, how is your story going? Well, I sat down, but I didn't really know what to write. And I got confused because you don't want to stand for anything. You're not willing to discount other things for something for yourself. And when you have to choose the words to describe that, you're choosing. And we used to see it all the time when people would give us Tinder profiles back in the day when we were doing a lot of dating help, which was who they looking for was, if you're cool and chill and you like to do cool stuff, then we're going to get along just fine. And it's like, what you told that person is that anybody will do and that you're not picky. Because of that, you're doing yourself a disservice.
The words we choose matter, and the getting into the details matters a lot. And here I like to go to, my wife is an elementary school teacher. And she always tells me that, when a kid throws a tantrum in the classroom, you ask them, well, why are you throwing a tantrum? And it's often like, something very generic, like I'm sad, right? And what you realize is that, 5-year-old or 6-year-old hasn't explored the vocabulary enough to understand their inner world, right? Everything just is like this blah feeling of like sadness or happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can't assign a label to it, there's nothing much you can do about it, right? It's like sadness. What in the world does that mean? But if they learn to say like, yeah, I'm frustrated because I didn't get picked at kickball, right? Then it's like, oh, there's some action we can have behind this. All right, you want to get better at kickball? Like, why don't you play it more often or whatever it is, And there's something behind it to solve that. And I think that's also true about the stories that we tell ourselves. Is often we use very generic, non-specific language and say, yeah, I just want to find a cool person. What in the world does that mean? Or I'm a nice guy. What in the world does that mean? What you have to do is, move from the stories that AJ and I probably read to or will read to our, young babies, See Spot Run, to, Game of Thrones or whatever, Mark Twain. We need some better descriptions there and some more complexity, because that's going to allow us to have more clarity on both who we are. And I also think like where we want to go.
I tend to think that's the technology that we have has influenced that, because we have all these opportunities and all these paths in front of us, and it's very exciting and it's a lot of fun. But that's not helpful. You have too many choices, too many paths. Even when we do marketing, you can't just leave the decision up to the other person. You have to guide them who become interested in a few choices that are going to help them. Because leaving it open, that becomes decision fatigue, and it's just not going to get done.
It's information overload. I mean, here's the deal. Is again, we talked about our society moving to anonymous society on steroids. We also have a brain that is meant to process, a decent amount of information, but now we're inundated with it by so much. And we know this affects us. So for instance, one of the most fascinating pieces is the impact of like social media and news everywhere. And what it has done is it has shifted our perception of how the world works. We now think, again, coming back to the danger, you look at surveys and data from psychological research, we think that the world is much more dangerous than it is. For instance, if you talk to people in my generation, I was born in the 80s, they'll say the world is much more dangerous than it was when we were growing up. But if you look at nearly all the data on murders, violence, it's much safer of a world, at least in the US. And the reason we have that perception is because of information overload. We're inundated with information telling us, often from news, social media, that the world is scary and that, someone got kidnapped or abducted or what have you. And our brain is used to processing that locally. So it assumes, oh, I saw someone got killed. That must mean that happened down the street, when it really happened in Alaska somewhere, right? And I think the same thing is true when we look at, the things that we want to do, the career paths we want to go down, the people we want to date. And it's the Tinder effect. When we have too many options, it puts us in this information overload, and our brain goes like, holy crap, like, I don't know which way to go. I don't know who to choose. Or it shifts our expectations so wildly that now we're never going to take action because our expectations are misaligned with reality. And you often see this with dating because, again, half a century ago, your choice was, I don't know, the 100 people who were your age and who live somewhat nearby. So you said, okay, like I'm going to pick the best option here. But now when I can, search millions, what have you, that's no longer good enough. So we don't settle down. We don't find someone we're going to connect with, because we always think there's something better out there. Or we have decision fatigue where we just say, hey, I can't even come to choose.
That exploration commitment duality, I think also is overridden by the screen. And so much of what Johnny and I talk about with our clients is moving beyond consumption into creation. So it's awesome that you may have found us by consuming our creation, the podcasts and the content that we put online, but so much of your life will be emboldened and fulfilled by acting out on the creation, not just the consumption. And right now we're in a situation where most of our exploration is through the consumption of other people's exploration, whether it's the clip of the person jumping off the bridge or it's the clip of the cats throwing their yarn, whatever it is, the clip is the exploration, but it's from your couch. It's not going out and doing anything. And then of course, without that, we can't even get to the point of commitment where we're actually like, okay, I've explored enough. Like now I'm ready to commit to the relationship, commit to the career, commit to the hobby, commit to the passion.
When you're creating, you come back to the place of picking and choosing. What do I want to create? What are the influences that I'm going to use? You're picking and choosing. By picking certain things, you're leaving other things out. So if you can do it over there, well, then it will only be a matter of time before you could do it for yourself, because your branding depends on that.
You can say exploration or commitment. You can also say like living an active or a passive life, because so much of our life right now is passive consumption, right? Where we are taking it in and we're just like the dude on Wall-E who's just like watching the screen and going for a ride and I guess kind of living, but not really. And I get it. Like we're all consumers of this stuff. We can't escape it. But what I would say here is step one is realizing, how are you using these things? How are you using social media? Are you using it towards an active thing? Or are you just passively consuming it? So there's a positive out there. So if you're listening to this, what you're doing is you're listening to, AJ and John's like active thing, because they produced this, they researched it, they got prepared for it. It took work. And it's great that you're consuming this. But the takeaway is not, hey, I'm just going to listen to this to kill an hour. It is, what piece of information am I going to take from this conversation and then actively apply it to our life? And that should be the goal of social media or listening to podcasts or whatever you're consuming, unless it's just recreational, right? Watching a TV show or what have you. But it's, what am I taking forward? I don't want to just mindlessly scroll. I want to use whatever information I have to turn it into something. And I think what we need nowadays, and you see this, is that we need to commit and block off time that is just for actively doing, creating, building, whatever it is in your pursuit, whatever it entails, and blocking off that time so that you can make it as easy on yourself to get going. So one of the things as a writer, like, I know I'm going to have all these distractions. So what do? I throw the phone in the other room and turn off the Wi-Fi when it is time to create, when it is time to sit down and write, because I need to prioritize that time, right? If you're an athlete, here's the natural comparison. If you're an athlete, like, you don't see Tom Brady go out to the practice field with his phone in his pocket. What is he doing? He's saying, no, I'm dedicating these hours to getting better at the craft. This is what I have to do.
And the last piece, part 3, sometimes it means belonging to groups that are also doing the deep work. And you could do it alongside of them, whether it's joining the run club or joining the band or starting a podcast with a friend. Like, find the community that reinforces the beliefs that you want to live your life around. And I know as new parents, we're thinking very clearly around, well, who do we want to expose our kids to? And what are their parenting perspectives? And do I want to let all of their sleep training guidelines or diaper change guidelines into my view? We're guarding it much more because we realize that the universe that we're cultivating with a family is so important. But so many of us, as we're going through this internal game work and trying to figure out who we are, we don't think then around the belong piece of, well, who are we letting in to reinforce these beliefs? And are they authoring or are they taking the victim mindset? Are they creating or are they just consuming and reinforcing consumption? So how are you viewing the belong piece now on your own personal journey?
again, the old adage that you become the people you surround yourself with is largely true, because there's data on this. There's a large study that looked at behaviors of friend groups. And I forget the exact data, but it was something like if your friend group started smoking, you were several times more likely to start smoking yourself. Same thing if your friend group started, to gain weight and get obese, you were more likely to get obese, several years later. Because what happens is, like, we know this from psychology research, our emotions and behaviors are contagious. They catch on. And in sport, we can see this. There's data that shows that if you have a coach who is the kind of guy or gal who loses their mind on the sidelines and just like yells and screams at the players, those players are more likely to feel and experience more stress and distress and lose their temper. And in sports like basketball, suffer more technical fouls from losing their temper, because that behavior from the coach, someone that they look up to probably, or at least are around a lot, is contagious. Even if they think, oh, I'm never going to be like that, it comes on to them. So I think the point is, like, when you're looking around, is like who you surround yourself matters a whole heck of a lot. So be mindful of, like, what are these people's values? What are their beliefs? What are their, behaviors? Do I want to be a creator or not? Do I want to be a person who blames, the world or takes a victim mindset whenever something bad happens? Or do I want to be the resilient person who says, like, yeah, this sucked, but let's get back on the horse and figure it out?
That internal guidance system is going to be very helpful there. If you don't have that, well, then you're blowing in the wind, whatever your friends are going to do, because you don't want to be left out. If you have an internal guidance system, you might say, these behaviors are not becoming of who I want to be. And so therefore, I'm going to have to change this friend group.
What's been so interesting about the belonging piece for me with the rise of the internet and our group coaching program, the X-Factor Accelerator, is how quickly those beliefs and behaviors can be shared, even if we're not in person together. So, we've had members of our X-Factor Accelerator start creating short form videos because they're seeing others in this group that's meeting weekly do things that they value. And you really don't have to look at it like, oh, well, I'm stuck in this environment. I'm stuck with this friend group. I'm stuck on this block. I'm stuck at this workplace. We've railed against technology in the negative. You can use it to the positive, to let the right beliefs in, to let the right online social groups in, to develop the parts of you that really matter to you, that aliven you, that allow you to start to thrive, to move from that survival into that thriving.
It's the good thing about the internet, right? Is we can find people with similar, desires or behaviors or goals who will make us feel alive and be able to take on challenges, which is huge if you were, again, in the past, that person who grew up maybe in the middle of nowhere and no one had that drive that you did. Now you can find like-minded people to do so. So, we railed on the internet, as you said, but I think this is one of those pieces where it's like, if you can find a tribe that makes you better, that pushes you, that holds you accountable, like, that's what it's all about. In those communities, I would say now more than ever are important because they ground us, they help us stay centered, and they push us to kind of come closer to our potential of what we maybe can do.
Coming full circle, I love at the start of this, you shared that, writing this book was actually a book you needed for yourself. In the research and everything that went into writing this book, is there one thing that you're personally taking away that was an aha or really enlightening moment for you completing the book and now putting it out into the universe?
We've talked a lot about belonging, and I think that really was it. I knew that it mattered, right? We all know we need to belong, but similar to you, AJ, is like, we have 2 kids under 2, and you start having those kids and you're like, holy crap, like these are who do I want influencing my child? You know, what beliefs and value systems do I want? Not even that, what role models do I want? Because those shape how our kids are going to see the world. We can only be what we can see. So the people around them are providing the models, the paths, the journeys that they can potentially go on. So I think that was the eye-opening spot for me, is like, not only surround myself with friends and family who support and help me be a better me, but also in my kids' life is like, how do I make sure that they have role models and avenues that aren't constricting them, that aren't saying like, hey, you can only do this, but show them that they put the work into it. If they do things right, like there's all sorts of possibilities out there. And I think in a interconnected world where AI and all this crazy stuff is happening, that's the kind of mindset you need.
Yeah, it's so amazing when you actually look at the impact that you have as parents, but then also how much time is going to be spent without you. So, we're in these moments now with newborns and young kids where we are their world, but ultimately who we bring into that world is going to influence them, because the time they spend with us is fleeting and they're going to go on their own journey. So that belonging piece, I love looking at it like, well, how would you treat yourself as a kid? So maybe you don't have kids, you're listening to this and you're not a new parent. If you were a kid, who would you want to be surrounding yourself with to influence those beliefs, those values, those goals in your life? And if you look around at your peer group currently, are those people there? Is that who you would want for your child to be around, or are they not? And maybe do we need to choose a different community or find a different group for that belonging piece that helps us wrestle with the inner game?
And here's an aha moment I had real quick on this. As I said, I got my start coaching college athletes, 18 to 22-year-olds. And one of the parents I talked to put this very succinctly to me once. He said, what happens is at some point early on, your kids all listen to you. They look up to you. They say, hey, dad and mom, they're great. I'm going to follow everything. But at some point, that kid is going to go through a phase where they're struggling and they're going to go talk to another adult. And that parent said, like, who that adult often is? It's that coach. It's that teacher. It's that friend's parent who they get along with, who they're going to go have for advice. Who do you want that person to be? And that, like, put it really succinct, is like, oh, okay. Like, the people who we surround ourselves, like this at some point is going to be who my kid goes to when he stops talking to me or listening to me on things. Like, they're going to go to this other person. This other person, I want them to give great advice and be able to talk to them. And I think, whether you have kids or not, like, this is so true of everything, because we all need other people who we're going to go to in those times. And it's not always going to be like the direct connection. It's those that we surround ourselves with. So really paying attention to that and making sure you have good people in your life, I think is the essence of living a good life.
Thank you so much for joining us again. Where can our audience find out about your latest project in this book?
Yeah, you can check out Win the Inside Game wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you want it. And all my stuff is at Steve Magness on basically every social media.
Thank you again.